come to this project with many of the same assumptions that you have.
Hello, and welcome back to Dark Static. This is our third episode. This is a podcast about found footage horror movies, and we'll be chronicling and discussing everything about the genre. I'm your host, Alex Schiffer, and with me is Zach.
Hello. Hi.
Oh! I thought you just went like, oh! Oh!
Oh! I said hello. Sorry.
Yeah. Our last episode was about the McPherson tape and alien abduction incident at Lake County, kind of our a double feature. This week we're back to discussing one film. This episode is going to be about
There's much less to talk about this week.
Yeah, this episode is about the last broadcast, and we'll be discussing that in just a few moments. Something I kind of want to discuss beforehand is we're kind of chronicling these found footage films from, I guess, like the inception of the genre. Like we started with Cannibal Holocaust, and we took it like to, there was a pretty big time jump, I'd say, between the last two films we talked about, or last three films actually. I just wanted to say, like, there is stuff in between. The only thing, and I remember, Zach, you actually like texted me like, we what about these? There's gonna be, and this is the thing with discussing this type of genre. There's gonna be like a couple of these films that are just kind of there. There's a lot of like weird, not like niche, but how would you like describe gore?
They don't quite fit within. Oh well, yeah. It depends on what you're talking about, but there's like we discussed stuff that was like outside of the genre of horror. Like I think the most significant movie that falls in between this movie and the last couple we talked about was a film called Man Bites Dog.
Yes.
Which is not a horror movie, but a notable found footage movie of the 90s.
Sort of found footage. Well, the distinction we need to make is that this podcast is going to be about found footage movies, but that if there's also the discussion about should we include mockumentaries,
right? Because
that's kind of found footage, but isn't really considered. Is it really considered like in this type of genre?
Yeah,
I haven't.
Open it up, so messy. Like
yeah.
What we were about to reference was I stumbled across these films and brought them up to you and was like, hey, you missed some. Should we cover these?
Yeah,
and
they're the guinea pig movies.
These are just gore porn. Like
it's pretty much gore porn. And listen, like I like gore. I like gory things. Zach, I'm sure you like gory shit too.
Yeah.
We're all used to it, but these we like gory films that have a narrative, I think is what we're trying to say. We want to tackle like narrative based found footage horror. And some of these films, like what's that? There's one that's just like vomit fetish. And that's like not popular, but certain subsections of the internet will be like, oh, this movie's disgusting, and it's like, well, we're not really gonna do disgusting. I'm trying to, like, when
we are not particularly gonna be doing just discuss. Yeah, because what can we say? Like, wow, that was terrible. That was really bad. How that guy got vomited on.
Ew.
Like, there's not
and listen,
a lot
like we cover like Cannibal Holocaust is already the extreme of that. I feel like that's real. Yeah. Not that, as we talked about in that show, like, hey, there's more shit going on in this movie. And that's kind of what I want this show to touch on the most. And that gets almost impossible with a bunch of other movies that are, that are considered found footage, but
there's interesting subject matter.
Yeah,
like,
when the subject matter is just like
horrible,
it's a horrible, mutilation of a person for like 80 minutes. And it's like, gotcha.
Cool. I got it. Yeah. In the first 20.
And it'll even get weird when we have to like eventually cover like, I think the August Underground movies are going to be in contention here. I think we're going to end up covering those. I think, and those movies aren't a walk in the park. But from what I remember, I've seen Mortem before. I don't think I've seen the other two, but they do have like story is all I'm trying to say. And that's kind of what I want to do with this podcast. Like this, I kind of want to give ultimately the found footage genre, I think it's time of day, in a more discussive, analytical manner than what I've seen from other people discussing the genre, because a lot of I feel like a lot of like content creators that talk about found footage always end up doing like the gross movie shtick. Like, oh, you got to watch this movie. It's so gross. And here's me like filming my reaction to watching these scenes. And it's kind of just a competition to outshock the other. When to me, the most interesting found footage media has some sort of narrative or some sort of interesting aesthetic also. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of movies we're going to be discussing, in this catalog that, they're not just, a lot of Marble Hornets, I would say a lot of analog horror on the internet that I eventually want to get to is all kind of about mood. To me, that's a more interesting conversation than just talking about movies that, show you a ton of gore. So I kind of wanted to get that off of my back, like just right on front. I'm not saying never for that stuff, but as for what we want to talk about now, I think this is the best way to go. And speaking of that, let's get to our film this week, which is The Last Broadcast. The Last Broadcast, made in 1998, predates Blair Witch Project, but I think we should make the distinction that this movie didn't inspire the Blair Witch Project, I don't think, because the Blair Witch Project was, as we'll talk about when we talk about that movie, that movie was in development for a lot longer than this one, but I think they're interesting pieces to actually put together. But yeah, The Last Broadcast, directed by Stephen Avalos and Lance Wheeler. They play, I don't know if I'd call them the leads, but they're kind of the subject matter of the movie.
Lead characters of important characters.
They're important characters.
Main characters.
Stephen plays his name is Stephen in the movie, and then Lance Wheeler was Locus, which I couldn't tell during the movie. It was like he was saying Lucas. I thought his name was Lucas for a lot of the movie, but then they actually bring that up. Yeah, they bring that up. I think when they're talking to like the sound guy that they go to when they first meet the like sound psychic that they go to, and he's like, "Your name's Locus."
Stage name, right?
Yeah, this is a movie about this film crew. They run a kind of like I think it's like a cable access show called Fact or Fiction. They have middling success here and there, but The Last Broadcast is basically this pseudo documentary. One of the first like real one of these we'll be talking about, where it kind of combines documentary and found footage into one film. And basically it's all about this crew that went missing while searching for the mythical Jersey Devil. Do you know anything about the Jersey Devil just in general, Zach? You familiar? You heard about this?
Heard of the Jersey Devil? You heard about this thing?
You heard about this guy?
I didn't know that much. No, I did like a casual sort of like cursory like Google. I had heard of the Jersey Devil before. I knew it was like a thing that existed somewhere in like the woodland areas of what I assumed it Jersey.
Yeah. The Pine Barrens specifically, which is a central point in the film.
Yeah, but getting back to very appropriate for my Italian man intro. This is
Hey, we should just do start every show like that now.
But no, I had no context for like why people believe in this thing or like what it was supposed to be, other than just a general sort of freaky cryptid.
It's kind of just like this interesting piece of folklore that honestly, like every state in the United States has.
Yeah, everybody has at least one of these.
There's actually this really, I don't know if you've ever watched the reboot of Mystery Science Theater. Probably one of their best episodes that they did. They had this song that goes, "Every country has a monster," and like every state in the U.S. has like some legendary creature that like.
That's kind of sweet.
Yeah, and apparently New Jersey's stupid haunted, which is cool. Honestly, Long Island is too. I'm coming at you from Long Island, and Long Island also has some pretty haunted places, and there's going to be some. I feel like some films that talk
symptom
about that.
of being on the East Coast is just like where, like the first Americans, the beginning of like European civilization and colonialization.
Yeah,
like just obviously like left just like this wake of tragedy, but then like it's the oldest part of like the United States of America.
Yeah,
so there's
like old 13 colonies and all that shit.
Right. So it's just like ripe for like ghost stories and things connected to, the actual fucking tragedies that happened. Even just like people dying of like, I don't know, like the flu when they
smallpox and shit. And a lot of horror is like can always, I think, like cycle back to like real life tragedy and all that. But when you get on like a scale like this, to like a culturally known, piece of folklore, like something like the Jersey Devil, that obviously that can stem from real events and all that. I'm not saying that there's an actual mythical demon living in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, but there probably is. Honestly, there's probably the Jersey Devil probably exists.
I mean, I want to believe.
I think the only thing that I really know about the Jersey Devil is maybe one of the funniest videos on the internet is the so-called real footage of the Jersey Devil, and it's like you can see it on YouTube, and it's like only footage of Jersey Devil ever found, and it's like this thing that looks like a goat on like what is obviously like a wire like floating through the trees. It looks you might have seen this video before. It just looks hilarious.
Maybe like,
and then people in the comments are like, "Oh my God, that's crazy."
Okay, well, I'm realizing between this and our last double,
this is me finding weird shit on YouTube.
It really does not take a lot to convince certain people that there's like a cryptid walking amongst them. Like, oh my God, that's so funny. I just watched it. That's awesome. It looks like somebody threw a goat.
You just saw it? Yeah. He threw a goat. It looks like it's like zip lining through the trees.
Yeah. That's so funny. Oh my.
Yeah, so that's the only thing that I know about the Jersey Devil. I always pictured it as like a chupacabra.
Yeah, like more of like a like an
But
amalgamation
a little bit more
of
sinister
animals.
because it has devil
Yeah,
in the name.
not just like a goat with bird wings, because
Yeah, that looks
that's what
cool. I want to own one.
yeah, I've seen that like photo of it before. But yeah, apparently it's like a super super old piece of folklore going back to like
18,
the 1730s or something.
1700s, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what the last broadcast is, loosely about, but it kind of, it does its own thing, and we'll get into that. What I want to say before we talk about the last broadcast any further is we will be spoiling everything about this movie right from the get-go, and I haven't given any spoiler warnings in the last 2 episodes, and I feel like I should do that now. In the last 2 episodes, we kind of just, zoomed off into, right into everything that happens in both of those movies. And I just want to give the warning now. You should watch this. It is on YouTube for free. So yeah, go and watch the last broadcast and then come back here and you can listen to us discuss it. Zach, let me get your overall opinions. What did you think of the last broadcast?
I think the act of watching it, I think I enjoyed it the least out of everything we've watched so far.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have the immediate kind of like antiquatedness of the like McPherson tape stuff. That kind of makes it fascinating to watch as like a like time capsule kind of thing, where you're like watching somebody figure out how to make found footage like as a genre. But it's much more of like a focused movie than that. Again, I think it's another one where it's just tough having like being familiar with where the genre goes and having seen like the best versions of it. It feels very much like a vanilla entry. Until a certain point, in which case, I think it becomes, regardless of your opinion on it, much more interesting. But you have to get through the majority of the movie before the movie sort of reveals what it's about. Because this is one of those movies that what it is becomes something completely different in the last like 10 minutes. But for what it was, I thought it was interesting. It was a fun. It was a decent watch, but I found a lot of it got like pretty repetitive to sit through. Because it is much of the same sort of shtick from beginning to almost end. I would say
almost. They were so close. They were so close. Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what you said. I will say, I think that I actually might have enjoyed it initially a bit more. I think I have some sort of reverence for, I don't know if it's the time period or just I like filmmakers trying to figure stuff out while the movie's happening. To me, like, that's the most endearing part. Like I identified with a lot of the endearing parts of McPherson tape. But yeah, this movie is definitely more focused. And honestly, parts of it that I found most interesting weren't even like considered to be most of, what the movie actually was. The thing I liked the most about the last broadcast until the end, which we'll get to, is kind of this overall aura of uncertainty that kind of masks the entire film. And it's something that you get from a lot of say like true crime documentaries where the case never goes solved. You never know who did it. That's kind of what this film does, except interestingly with this film crew that is in search of this, mythological figure. So it has the genre and it has that air of mystery for most of it. Some of the court stuff is a little bit, repetitive, but it normally is in something that's, structured like a true crime documentary. But then
I was going to say, to your point, it is a true crime doc. It's a fake
Yes.
true crime doc. Up until this point, we've watched things that are like movies with like a found footage component in them, or like found footage that's trying to convince you that it's a real tape.
Yes. So far, actually, like the only movie that was completely found footage was the McPherson tape.
But this is presenting not just as found footage in the sense of like a home movie that you found somewhere. This is presenting as like what many people watch today on Netflix all the time, which is like a
true crime and
a telling of like a true crime that happened and has yet to be like unraveled, like a cold case kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that might be part of the reason I didn't find it as interesting, is because like it's in part a horror movie when you're able to get to those chunks where like you're watching the footage of these people go into the woods. But for much of it, it is like what you said, the court proceedings and them talking about like the evidence and how
it's very procedural.
Yeah, it's way more of a procedural than like a straight horror movie,
which I think is kind of I was into for a little while, because it honestly did what is most effective about those documentaries. It fills that like aura of uncertainty, which, you know, is a good and effective form of horror. And I was interested for a while. And, you know, it's funny because this movie isn't even that long. It's an hour. It's almost an hour and a half. It does feel longer, I will say. Whereas the other ones are very, when we covered the McPherson tapes, both of those movies I feel like were very short, and they felt short. This one definitely has a lot more meat to it, so it feels, you know, the pace is definitely a lot more of a noticeable thing that you start to notice in the film. I also really liked, not the lead performance. I feel like we keep touching upon this overarching thing, but I don't want to get to it just yet. I liked the characters that Stephen Avalos and Lance Wheeler played in the film. The reason why is because, number one, that's where most of the found footage actually takes place. But the way that it's shot is definitely what stands out most to me. Usually in found footage films that we'll see, you know, even starting with the Blair Witch Project, is a lot of these like, you know, landscapes of darkness or a complete, you know, subject in the frame. But The Last Broadcast, and it's always centered on its lead performers, and it always feels very isolated to them. You never really get to see much outside in the actual found footage sections of this film. And I feel like it kind of works here because you end up establishing a lot more of like a connection with the characters, because, you know, the camera is just always focused on them. Like there's a lot of scenes in cars and them talking, a lot of close-ups of them giving like interviews, and you feel like you kind of get to know them a little bit more than I'd say a lot of, you know, lead characters in found footage movies. But they're also not really the lead characters, as we'll talk about. I don't know if you had anything more to say about that.
No, I think that I think we're gonna get to it.
Yeah. I did like a lot, you know, a good amount of this film. There is an overarching issue that culminates in an absolutely disastrous last like 10 minutes.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Okay.
So
I want to hear what you have to say.
So remember in not in the McPherson tape, but in Alien Abduction Incident Lake County, when you had a perfectly good found footage movie, you know, pretty basic by the numbers, but it was still like well executed. And then they would just cut away to these crazy interview sections that were like completely took you out of every inch of inch of the film.
Yeah.
No.
That is my favorite guy in the movie.
I love this random British rocker. I wish he'd show up in every single one of these.
Yeah, I wish he did more.
That would have been hilarious. He just showed up in this. It's like crazy. It's like crazy that they'd go missing. Anyway, I have a lot to say about this last 10 minutes. And I want to get to it now because there are some other good things actually I want to say about the movie. I want to end the show on more of a positive note. But let's get this thing out of the way. So, as I've been saying, this whole film has been, about this film crew. They were filming this documentary called Fact or Fiction. It's like this, I'd equate it to like a ghost hunting show. Or, just shows. I think that the trend. Like
Ancient Aliens or Ghost Hunter and stuff like that. Like,
yeah, it's like a ghost hunting show, Fact or Fiction. But the last broadcast isn't really about it. Well, it is about them, but it kind of has the voice of God over it. It has this narrator that is compiling all of the events that happened in this film. Ultimately, what does happen is the film crew goes missing. They think there's only one guy that survives that comes out, and they obviously convict him. But there's, through video evidence, there's like no way that he could have done it. And all of this is being compiled by one man named David. And David is kind of being he's like our host. There's actually a really interesting plot point where this unseen footage, this unseen tape gets dumped at his door. And he takes it to a restorationist to, get restored and so they can find more evidence. But what ends up happening is, she's restoring more and more of the film. And we go back to our narrator, our boy Dave, and he's in the car and he's like, all right, now we're going to go see what's going on with the restoration. What's new with the tapes. And they end up revealing that the real murderer is Dave, and he goes into the restorationist house and suffocates her with like this plastic wrapping that is like all over her house. Suffocates her, drags her body out into the woods, and continues like doing the documentary. That's the ending to this film. That's everything that not that they've set up a whole lot, to be honest, but I thought this ending kind of screwed over the whole tone it was going for, the whole aura that it established. It kind of just falls on its face at the end. I will say it's hilarious. It's a hilarious ending to me, in a kind of like in a so bad it's good, I guess, kind of way. But yeah,
why didn't it work for you?
I think it didn't work for me because I was really ready for the film to end. There's a certain point in the film, like before the last 10 minutes, where they start queuing up music and fading to black a lot. And I was like, okay, this is the ending. As I was pondering, like, oh, this really did a good job, establishing this air of mystery and this, this aura of uncertainty. And I liked it at that point as kind of this piece of tone. And yeah, I wasn't exactly like, the plot is the plot. It's not really that, at least to me, especially in this genre, plot isn't very important to me. So when you go for a twist ending like that, I think, and it is the last thing that you see. It kind of fell apart for me, although it was entertaining.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I don't know why she had all the plastic sheeting in her house.
Yeah, like that, like when he stepped in the door, like, oh, immediately, like, oh, this is a good thing to use. Like, thank God, I was just gonna strangle her with my hands. That would have been way harder.
Oh, it's so embarrassing.
Yeah. What a bad murderer. He had to improvise.
Yeah, I guess because you enjoyed the like vibe of the rest of the movie, then that just kind of got in the way of that. For me, it was like it felt like one of the few interesting, like unique things to happen in the movie. And even if you like, I think like as we go forward, it will kind of remain at least like a pretty unique ending, because I don't think, as far as I remember, I've seen an ending to one of these things where they basically just reveal that the mysticism and the monster and all that stuff is like completely fake. Like it's not real at all. It's all staged, and you weren't watching a horror movie like the entire time, basically.
The real monster is Dave. Is Dave.
Is Big Dave.
Is Big Dave.
But I agree with you. I think like there's definitely like it's not like perfect. It is kind of like you don't have any context for who Dave is. He's just
he's just kind of like this voice of God, you know.
Yeah, he's like making.
It's like it's like as if like in an episode of The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling comes in at the end and like kills the main character.
well, at least David is like.
Yeah, at least it is a documentary. Yeah, I guess that's a bad.
Yeah, he's not like. Yeah.
It's like if Ken Burns. It's like if Ken Burns came in at the end. Yeah.
But okay. Here's why I at least found it like pretty interesting. Is because as this movie was happening, I was thinking something that kind of struck me, and I was discussing this with somebody who was watching it with me, is that because it's like a fake true crime doc, it made me think about like how like dominant true crime is now, where it's just like every 5 seconds there's like a new true crime thing. And I think in a really like accidentally prescient way, maybe this movie taps into what feels really weird about true crime today. And I mean, I guess true crime existed back then in the 90s too, but it was not as huge and dominant an industry.
Wasn't
today,
so much true crime content to consume so easily in any given moment.
It wasn't as huge budgeted. It wasn't like as big budgeted. It wasn't pushed in front of. There's people who literally just watch true crime and like nothing else, like no movies. Like
there's people that make their whole careers off of just talking about true crime.
Yes, yeah, true crime podcasts, right? Like, thank God we're not doing that. But the thing that this movie posits, and we kind of skipped over this character, I think a little bit, is there's the Jim character who's like a psychic.
Yes,
who's with them, and he is like the accused. Like he's the only one who made it back, and so everybody assumes that.
Yeah, so all the blame gets put on him.
Right.
It's like they literally have no other evidence. It was like you're the only one who made it back.
Yeah, you're the only one who makes it back. So they go to the footage, and they literally say in the movie, and I literally wrote down, oh wow, they're actually acknowledging it. Somebody literally says out loud, I forget which person. They say that they went to this footage basically to trust it to provide like the absolute truth.
The footage you're seeing is actually being used as like a plot device.
It's actually it's being used as like a tool. Like whatever the filmmaker perceives as the truth is what comes out. Like I don't think people, maybe this is like condescending, but I feel like a lot of people don't quite understand editing when they're not like filmmakers. And like there's literally like days of
that's the thing. Like you're not supposed to really see it, you know, unless you're. It's also like the role for sound design too. Like if you're not a sound designer,
Well, I mean, I'm talking about like
the sound. You're supposed to be in the illusion of what is supposed to be real.
But for a movie that's cool, for like something like this that makes
sense.
For
a traditional narrative, yeah.
For true crime where you're supposed to be making something about a real murder that happened where a real person died, and then like your documentary is potentially pinning the blame on like a real dude. It's like you better have it right. Like
yeah. Well, they even go out of their way to like show who's editing the movie that you're currently watching. Like he's a subject in this film. Cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. And the same thing with Cannibal Holocaust. And that's why I mentioned in that show, how it's the first time I kind of made the point where I was like, in found footage media, the cut is so much more of a powerful tool. Like you need to really earn every cut that you do.
Yeah, and in this movie, I did notice in this movie they it was edited like way faster, versus the other ones. Well, the last
because it was edited kind of like a TV docuseries, like that. It's a very fast pace and multiple things on screen at once. Juggling between different footage. It's definitely a lot more fast paced than say in the McPherson tape, which is just like a static shot the entire time.
I guess I'll try and summarize my point, but I know it's very long-winded and a little bit broad, but they do a little bit of setup, and I didn't perceive it as setup because I didn't give the movie credit while I was watching it, but I was like, "There's who gives a shit about this?" But there is some lip service that they pay to part of the reason that everybody's in on this. This is such a big deal is because there's an election happening soon, and so a major crime is a big deal and how it's handled.
Yeah.
So there's all this stuff where basically people are rushing to pin the blame on the easy target, and then are utilizing the video footage as a tool to pin it on him. And then after all this happens, there's even multiple people who are saying the video editor who are saying how this publicity and the tape improved their careers.
Yeah.
And stuff. And
which is ironic considering the actual Fact or Fiction crew, the people that go missing. And this is actually one of the things I really loved about the last broadcast is the cute little detail that their show is kind of failing. And they're kind of doing this last ditch effort broadcast to kind of save their careers and to save the show.
Yeah, that's I think that's this one of the scariest parts of it is that they went out desperate to find an info.
Yeah.
And they died, and then other people are like, "Wow, it's pretty great how they died."
They banked off of it.
Yeah. And so it is kind of tapping into the actual unspoken thing with true crime, I feel, where it's this commodification of people who actually died. And I guarantee there's no way that every true crime doc ever made that comes to a conclusion on a mystery or points towards certain conclusions without saying it is actually correct. Some of them gotta be wrong. Some of them have to be pinning the blame on just totally innocent people. And in this case, that's kind of why I like the ending is because in the midst of all that, the guy who did it is the person making the movie. And
it's I like that. I do like that. I just don't think while I was it didn't work for me in that sense because I think while I was watching, I wasn't really judging the quality of the film from that perspective. I was just kind of like you said, I was just vibing with it, and the ending is what it is, and kind of ruins that vibe a bit. I also do think, having seen, this is something I think that you had a problem with the McPherson tape, is just having seen better versions of this. And I have seen a better version of the last broadcast in a film called the Poughkeepsie Tapes, which we'll be discussing on this show very soon. Everything that is set up that's good that's set up in the last broadcast is kind of executed better in that film, especially with the like societal aspect of it too. There's a big message there. Like you're talking about, it doesn't, quite go into it does revel in the fact that it's a true crime. It's a bit of a true crime doc. Whereas the last broadcast, as you've discussed, is kind of, commenting on that, whether it's textual or subtextual or not,
Yeah. I'll say like I didn't feel any of that until I can understand why it didn't work for you, because I didn't pick up or feel any of that until literally the last like 10, like a little bit before the serial killer reveal, like the last like 15, 20 minutes when you see people talking about like how it affected them and stuff. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But for most of the movie, I was just sitting there kind of going like, okay.
Did you think throughout this film that anything supernatural was actually going to happen?
I did, because because it's one of the first found footage movies, I assumed just like, oh, this is probably going to be like
the monster
proto
movie.
Yeah, like this is going to be the movie that, inspired the Blair Witch, which turned out not to be true. But yeah, I did think they were going to reveal something, and I thought it was not going to be effective because I wasn't finding the horror to be effective.
Yeah. I also thought the same way. And I actually thought when they get to the point where the filmmaker like gets all the, rabbles of tape, I thought they were just going to let that play, and now you get to find out what actually happened in the Pine Barrens that night. But they don't do that. They actually just use that kind of interestingly as a plot device and kind of an excuse to meet a new person, a new character in the real world, in the world of the documentary, which I thought was pretty neat. I also want to point out, as I said before, like I kind of dug the two characters, Steve and Locus. Jim was, I didn't know about that performance at all. And the entire sequence that was pretty important where he runs away from the group but then just comes back for the rest of the film. He's just doing like IRC, and it's like, oh yeah, they were fine, but he like ran away, and that was like used as pivotal piece of evidence for the case. I think what I liked most is actually the technical part of it. Like I liked whenever they were just discussing how they're going to shoot the show. It's funny, watching that now. It's like, oh, they're because they're using like what then was at the time consumer grade camera equipment. So it was just kind of fun to listen to how they were gonna set that up.
Yeah, cool.
It's funny because like the actual, as I said, like the found footage parts, because most of this film is just is a lot of interviews, but the interviews are really, I think, well constructed. And the found footage parts are kind of unique in that they're so close, and that they really don't, because when you'll see something in like when we talk about the Blair Witch Project, there's just so much like landscape, and that adds to the horror. But in this movie, it's getting you up close with the characters, so you establish this rapport with them. I dug a lot of this, more than I thought I initially did, but now that I'm like talking more and more about it, I think I like it more, than I initially did. Like going into this review, I still stand by the ending, what I thought about it. But I'd say this is an interesting watch. Do you have any final thoughts, or is there anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I mean, I thought it was cool how when the killer comes in, it like immediately switches from found footage to normal.
Yeah,
movie.
There's a unspoken for cameraman. There's invisible camera at the end of this film.
Yeah, it's all of a sudden it's a very indie looking.
Yeah, which I think is meant to just completely separate you from the reality that the movie is trying to portray through the rest of it, because it's portraying itself as real. It's kind of, living the illusion, and then the very end, you see a camera shot of him filming himself in the woods. I don't think a lot of found footage films do that. Where it's like, all right, enough with the charade, enough with the charade. Here's an invisible camera for this last shot to kind of just tell you that this is a movie.
Right. Yeah. They're like afraid to break the tone.
Yeah, to kind of break the illusion of the film. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. There wasn't as much to talk about with this one.
That's the thing with these early ones. I see these a lot of these films, the early ones, is like, just simple setups for, what's to come in the future. And it's anything with, early entries in the genre. I still think it's nice to see where a lot of this comes from. And the last broadcast is still an indicator of it, and it might not have influenced some of the most famous ones that we'll talk about, but I think it definitely has a place in, an interesting place in the catalog of found footage. And I also think, just as from a pure artistic perspective, some of these films are pretty sincere because they're so low budget and kind of amateurish. But that kind of reminds me of something that I would make. Like, you're always taking influence from certain things, and it's fun to see where all that comes from. And I think the last broadcast definitely has an influence on some of our later entries in this selection.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next. I think as we go forward, I can definitely foresee like the flavors of film getting more kind of interesting.
More juicy, yeah. That's kind of I guess that kind of wraps it up for the last broadcast. Again, you can watch this film all on YouTube. It's only an hour and 26 minutes long. It's definitely worth checking out. You can find this podcast on anywhere you get your podcasts from. Make sure to give it a comment and a rating. That'll definitely help us out a whole lot. Zach, you got anything to plug?
No, just I'm opening an escape room in Rochester, New York. It's called GTFO, Get the Fork Out Studios. We're at 120 East Avenue. So if you find yourself anywhere in the greater Rochester area, I mean, we have the best one. Opening date is tentative, but I think it's looking like early summer. So hopefully by, I believe next month, June, we should be in business.
Do you guys have a website yet?
We are close to launching the website. It's not launched. It exists, but it doesn't. You can't find it because it hasn't launched yet. You can follow me at The Real Stefan Spielberg on Instagram. And I have a link to my website, short film stuff like that there.
Awesome. Yeah, you can find me at Schiffer Audio, Twitter, Instagram. Listen to my audio fiction podcast, Inheritance Ash Falls. That's anywhere you get your podcasts. Yeah, I also have a show on Audible called Stillwater Bay that you can listen to. And Letterboxd. I'll always log every film that we watch on the show. That's also at Schiffer Audio. You can find me on Letterboxd. So yeah, that's it for this week's episode of Dark Static. Join us next time for the Blair Witch Project.